Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video. You guys know I'm always looking for the best deals on power stations, and I have found a really good deal here. This is from ALLPOWERS. This is their new R2500. Now they actually have a full series of these power stations. They have the smallest, which is the R600. They have a slightly bigger one, the R1500. They have this one, the R2500, and they have even a bigger one, which is the R3500. And these power stations have a ton of really good features, but the price is really competitive. Now it's funny to think that the first power station that I tested on the channel was actually from ALLPOWERS, so we've come full circle here. And I'll tell you, that video is super cringy, so please don't go back and watch it. Now when I say competitive, I mean with both pricing and feature set. So let's talk about pricing first because it's really, really good. Now the MSRP on this model is $15.99 and it's currently on sale for $9.99. I also have a discount code for you guys, my viewers, to drop the price down to $879, which is only 43 cents per watt hour. This power station has over 2,000 watt hours of capacity, so you are picking this up for a really, really good deal. Now, what about features? Because I know it's important to have the features that you're looking for. So on this one, this has UPS functionality with a 15 millisecond cutover. It has fast internal wall charging. This also features up to 1,000 watts of solar input at 150 volts input. So there's no 60 volt cutoff on this. This also has really good DC output options. It has a 2500 watt pure sine wave inverter, and it also has a decent set of USB options. This also takes expansion batteries, so you can expand it to get a lot more capacity. So not only is it priced well, but it comes in with a lot of good features, and we'll be testing this very thoroughly in the rest of the video to see if this one's worth it. Now let me give you guys a breakdown of what's going to happen in the rest of the video. So we're going to do a bunch of testing on the AC inverter to see how many watts we can get from it, see if it's a pure sine wave output, break down how it actually performs. Then we're going to test the DC output, which is the 12 volt socket here, the barrel plugs, and the USB ports. And then after that, we'll do a bunch of charging demos to see if we can get the full solar input, see how it functions, see if there's any bugs or issues with that. Now between each one of those testing sections, I will break down kind of the performance and give you guys an overview. And don't forget, there are a bunch of chapters at the bottom of the video that you can jump to see specific performance numbers on this. Now after we've completed all the testing on this, I'll have a bunch of data that I can put into my power station grading system to see how this stacks up against the competition. So don't miss the end of the video where we give this a score of 1 to 10 and see how it compares against other models that cost more money, because this comes in at a good price, but does it actually perform as good as those models, or is it actually worth it? So we'll find out. Let's jump into testing the AC inverter. Now first off, what is an AC inverter and why do we need one? Well, inside this power station, you have a large battery, which is DC power. And if you want to run appliances in your home, like fans, computers, cooking appliances, power tools, things like that, you need a way to convert that DC power into AC power. So that's what the inverter does. Now, if you look on the front, you have these outlets that you can plug your appliances into. And you also have an RV style connection right here. Now, these are all for convenience. Basically allows you to plug in multiple devices at the same time. Now the inverter is limited to 2,500 watts output, so you can't go over 2,500 watts. But I like to find out how this actually performs, like what type of power do we get from it and what can it run. So in my first set of tests, I want to see some real world applications to see how it powers up power tools, refrigerators, things like that. And then we'll take it to my bench and we'll do some actual bench testing to see the voltage. And we'll check it with my oscilloscope and see its actual performance. So let's jump into those tests. How can you actually use this power station around the house? In my first test, I wanted to try different power tools like my large miter saw, circular saw, and hammer drill on the AC inverter to see how the inverter handles inductive or surge loads. The R2500 powered up my large miter saw multiple times without a sweat. It also was able to power up my circular saw and hammer drill without an issue, so this unit would be great for powering other similar tools as well. Due to the 2500 watt inverter, this would also be able to handle cooking appliances in your kitchen. It can power full-size microwaves, toasters, air fryers, and even crock pots. If you have these appliances in your camper or RV, you could also connect your shore power cable to the RV port on the front of the power station to power those as well. The ALLPOWERS R2500 is also great for emergency preparedness because you can run your full-size fridge during an extended power outage. With my basement fridge connected, I was able to run it for a total of 23.5 hours before the inverter shut down at 5% capacity remaining. Now, if you're looking for longer run times, you can connect in solar panels to charge or even connect up an expansion battery. Now, how much usable capacity should you expect from the R2500 inverter? The internal LFP battery is rated for 2016 watt-hours of capacity. When draining the power station down until the inverter shut off, I was able to measure 1720 watt-hours of usable capacity. This result is 85.3% of the advertised capacity and is a great result of hitting our goal of at least 85%. Next, how much power is used as the AC inverter is enabled and sitting idle? I started this test with the power station at 100% state of charge and left the inverter enabled for 12 hours with no load. Now when I came back, it was sitting at 76% state of charge, meaning the inverter had used 26% of the battery after a 12-hour period, or about 2.16% per hour. Now just be aware that that background power draw is higher than the average result testing models this size. Now how does the power station perform under a max load test? I started by setting up a 2500 watt load on the inverter. After the test had been going for a few minutes, I checked the output with my oscilloscope. It was showing a pure sine wave output, however, I only measured 112 volts output at 60 Hertz, so just a little lower than what I like to see. My goal is usually 115 to 120 volts AC. I also noticed that the battery percentage dropped fairly quickly when I started this test, so the battery percentage accuracy might not be the best when running intensive loads. After 10 minutes had passed, the power station fans were at their full speed, and I measured 57 decibels with my sound meter from 3 feet away. Do the fans move enough air to keep the internal components from overheating? With my thermal camera, I measured the max temperature of 115 degrees near the exhaust fan ports. After I finished those measurements, my stopwatch hit the 15-minute mark, and the power station passed the max load test without shutting down. Now, how many watts will the inverter allow you to pull before it shuts down from being overloaded? I turned up the load from our previous test to around 2650 watts, and the power station ran this load for about 1 minute and then shut off the inverter and displayed an overloaded error message. So it's nice to have a little bit of leeway above that 2500 watts if you need it. Now, I also like to check to make sure that the outlets are wired properly and to see if it has an open or floating ground. So I have the inverter on. Let's connect in my outlet tester. So we have indication that it does have an open ground whenever it's not charging from the wall. With the power station connected to wall power and in UPS mode, if we look at the outlet tester, you can see it's wired properly and grounded. So whenever you're charging from the wall, the power station becomes grounded. Now I did verify that the 20 amp outlets are all wired properly, so let's check the 30 amp outlet. So yes, it is also wired the same, open or floating ground whenever it is not charging from the wall, and when it's charging from the wall, it is grounded. The ALLPOWERS R2500 also features UPS functionality with an advertised cutover time of 15 milliseconds. With my desktop workstation and studio lights connected up and my oscilloscope to measure the actual cutover time, let's unplug the power and see how fast the cutover is. UPS test, 3, 2, 1, record. Now here's a screen capture of the actual UPS cutover. So from this cursor to this cursor is actually when it lost power, and that's a measurement of 11 milliseconds. So that's pretty cool. It actually performs better than advertised, and with 11 milliseconds, it's gonna work with most electronics. Now I am running a stress test on the PC just to make sure that it's fine even under load. I wanna do a couple more tests just to verify that it works properly. So second UPS test, 3, 2, 1. Third UPS test, 3, 2, 1. So it appears the R2500 does work well as a backup UPS. In my final test, I want to see if the power station inverter creates any interference or noise when enabled. This test is helpful for people wanting to run sensitive audio equipment. Using my dirty electricity meter to measure this, the electromagnetic interference reading was measuring over 2000 millivolts of EMI noise. I also wanted to test with my guitar amp plugged into the inverter to see if it created any audible noise. Comparing the inverter output to wall power demonstrates that the R2500 does have noise on the AC inverter. One example of this noise is when my camera is really close to the power station and recording, it picks up this noise while AC wall charging. Now what about interference on a small handheld AM radio? With the AC inverter turned on, these were the results of the test.
What have I been with Verizon? With any iPhone trade in any model, any condition.
Because of this interference with the radio, I'd recommend keeping your audio equipment at least a couple feet away from the power station to avoid it. Now that was a ton of information, so let's break that down really quick, going through the good things first. So the AC inverter, we were able to get the full power from it. It was a pure sine wave. The actual advertised capacity, when we discharged this, we got 85%, so that's really good as well. And the UPS cutover was really quick at 11 milliseconds, so this worked really well as a dedicated UPS. Now, what about some of the quirks or not so good things? Well, first off, when you turn on the AC inverter, the fan runs all the time. So having that fan running is kind of an annoyance. It'd be really cool to see a firmware update to make that fan so it doesn't run all the time. I'd love to have it run on a need basis. Also, the actual output was a little bit low on the voltage. Love to see at least 115 to 120 volts, but we did not get that. It was 112 volts output. So this is kind of a 110 volt AC inverter, so it's kind of compatible with Japan's market at 100 volts and our market at 120 volts, so it's kind of in between, so they can sell it in both places. So that's kind of like a cost savings measure there. The other thing was the fact that the inverter is not super efficient. Its standby losses are around 2% per hour, which is a little bit high. So you will have to offset that during the day with solar to keep this from just dying, quite a bit whenever the AC inverter is turned on. So kind of seeing a bit of the budget power station come through with the AC inverter tests. And that's just what you get. You pay for what you get, but you'll have to make the decision. Is the cost savings worth a few of the quirks that we've discovered so far? Now in the next set of tests, I want to test the DC output. So that's the USB ports here and the DC output. I want to see how many watts we can get from that. Can we power a full diesel heater, or are we going to be limited? So let's find out. Let's jump into the testing on the DC output. Jumping into my first test, what voltage do we get from the DC output? I confirmed the DC output of the R2500 is regulated at 12.5 volts. How much wattage can you pull from the 12 volt cigarette port and the barrel ports on the power station? Using my battery load tester, I was able to pull a maximum of 129 watts from the cigarette port. When testing one of the barrel ports, I was limited to slightly under 75 watts. Now when testing both ports at the same time, I was able to pull a total of 128 to 129 watts before the output shut down from being overloaded. Now what about the USB ports? You can turn them on through this button here, and you have quite a few options to charge your mobile devices. So taking a closer look, you have two USB-C 100 watt power delivery ports on top, and then you have four USB-A ports. So these are USB-A quick charge ports and then USB-A standard ports. So testing the first 100 watt USB-C port, we are charging at 100 watts, and it is the Power Delivery 3.0 100 watt protocol. Now testing the second port, we're also getting 100 watts on the PD 3.0 protocol, charging this power bank. So both ports are the proper protocol and both put out 100 watts. Now I wanted to see if we could get the full 200 watts output if we had two 100 watt devices connected up. So with my Energizer and my power bank, we are actually charging at a full 200 watts output. So very cool to be able to get both 100 watt ports working at the same time. Now I also wanted to make sure that you could have all the USB ports active at the same time. So I've connected up a bunch of different devices. So with all 6 USB ports active, we are pulling over 220 watts. So that is a decent amount of power through USB ports. Now I also want to test to see how much power we can get from the USB ports and the DC output at the same time if you wanted to max out the DC output on the power station. So with all the USB ports and the DC output maxed out, you're going to get around 345 to 350 watts, which is a decent amount of power. Now, how much usable capacity can we pull from the DC output as we discharge the power station? The ALLPOWERS is advertised to have 2016 watt hours of capacity, and while draining the power station completely down till it shut off, I was able to pull a total of 1,735 watt hours. These results were 86% of the advertised capacity, which is an excellent result for such a large power station like this. In the next test, I wanted to see how much power is used as the DC output is sitting idle with no load. I started the test at 100% state of charge, and checking in 12 hours later, it was at 99% state of charge, meaning the DC output is very efficient and doesn't use much power while it's sitting enabled. It's important to verify that the DC output doesn't shut off overnight. In this test, I used my Iceco Go20 12 volt fridge connected to the cigarette port and let it run over a 24-hour period. Since the fridge compressor sits idle for a bit of time while running, this is a good way to confirm that there aren't any timeout settings on the power station. Checking in the next day, the DC output hadn't shut down and the fridge was still running with the power station at 85% state of charge, so running a 12-volt fridge, CPAP, or even a small fan overnight should not be an issue on the R2500. Now finally, how does the DC output affect a handheld AM radio? Here's a demo of what happens when you have a small radio next to the power station with the DC output enabled.
And you can see that late. There's a little, there's a little unsurety late in the game with Minnesota on who is.
Now, to avoid this interference, you'd want to keep your sensitive devices a couple feet away from the power station. So recapping the DC test results, we were able to get 86% of the advertised capacity as we discharged it through the DC output. So that's actually really good for a large power station. Most don't do that. So really efficient. We saw really good idle power usage with the DC output, only lost 1% over a 12-hour period. So the DC output is very efficient. Now, I love that this has a ton of USB options, 6 different USB ports, including 2 100-watt ports that you're able to get 100 watts at the same time. So 200 watts total, which is really cool. Just the only bummer for me is I like to get at least 150 watts output through the cigarette port or the barrel ports so that you're able to power diesel heaters or high-powered DC air compressors. But on this one, you can't do that. We're limited to around 129 to 128 watts before it shuts off from being overloaded. So you can run a bunch of smaller things, but you won't be able to run the larger DC loads like diesel heaters and things like that. So just keep that in mind. But overall, really good performance on the DC output, lots of different ports for connecting, and it is super efficient. In the next section of the video, I want to do a bunch of tests on the R2500 to see how it performs while charging. Does it support pass-through charging? What about dual charging, meaning it can take AC and DC input at the same time? And does it have adjustable AC charging speeds? What's the maximum power we can get in through solar or AC charging? Well, let's do some tests to find out. If you connect to the R2500 using the Smart app, you can go into work mode settings, and it appears to have multiple charging speeds. You have mute mode, standard mode, and fast mode. So let's see how many watts we can get via AC charging on each one of these options. When having it set to the fast charge mode, you're going to see around 1500 watts input. This will give you a full charge from 0 up to 100% state of charge in a little under 1.5 hours. And if you have it set to mute mode, you're going to see around 650 watts input, which will fully charge the power station from 0 up to 100% in a little over 3 hours. Now, having it set to standard charging mode, you'll see 1000 watts input. This will fully charge the power station in a little over 2 hours. Now, it does appear that you need the Smart app connectivity to adjust your AC charging speeds. So maximum speed was around 1500 watts, minimum was around 650, so fairly decent charging options with AC input on the R2500. The next test is to find out if this supports dual charging. I want to connect solar and AC charging at the same time to see what happens. So let's go ahead and connect in solar. So it should just take a second to start working there. So there goes our solar input. And then let's go ahead and plug in AC charging. So I've had the solar panels connected here for a minute or two, and we are getting almost 950 watts input. There we go, saw 950 on the screen. This unit has a maximum input of 1000 watts, so we're really close to that. So now I want to see what happens as we connect up AC charging at the same time. What will happen to the wattage? So let's plug in the AC charging. So just giving it a second to think here, now we are charging at almost 2000 watts input. So basically 1000 watts from solar and 1000 watts from AC input. So in fact, this does support dual charging, which is awesome. So it's always good to see a power station that supports DC and AC input at the same time. Now, what about pass-through charging, or the ability to charge the power station and discharge it at the same time? Well, I have the USB ports enabled, the DC output enabled, and the inverter enabled with loads on each one of those. And we're charging with solar and AC input at the same time. So this does support full pass-through charging, and all the outputs are enabled. So thumbs up to pass-through charging on the R2500. Now, what about the charging ports on the R2500? Well, you have your DC input here, and you have your AC input here. For the DC input, it supports 12 to 150 volts input, and it will limit the current to 13 amps. Now, this will limit out at around 1000 watts. So you can get 1000 watts of solar input on the R2500, and it uses an XT60 connection, which is great for high power. Now right here you have your internal AC charging, so you just use a charging cable, which is great. And that supports 100 volts all the way up to 120 volts with 15 amps maximum. And you guys already saw that we got around 1500 watts peak charging on AC input. Now I did test solar a little bit earlier. We were getting pretty close to 1000 watts input. I'll go ahead and reconnect that in, see how much we can get, and I'll take you outside to show you the solar array that I have it connected up to. So I've reconnected the solar input, and we're getting around 930 to 940 watts input. Now the conditions aren't perfect outside, and I'm over paneling this a little bit, so let me go ahead and show you guys that array. So these are the 3 panels that I have wired up to the R2500. I actually just installed these panels last weekend. So this is a brand new array. This is a 1200 watt array. So 3 400 watt solar panels wired together in series, and it's definitely under the 150 volt limit. So it works perfect with the R2500. I used a snap and rack rail system and their speed feed, and it really came together really nicely. Now we're getting around 950 to 960 watts from this, and that's because the current conditions are a bit mixed. You can see we have quite a bit of clouds going back towards the sun, and that's the benefit of over paneling the power station, so you can get almost full power input even though we have more wattage available in our system. So this is a 1200 watt system, and we're getting around 950 to 960 watts out of it. So it works really well on the R2500. Okay, so I want to test the R2500 with a smaller solar panel. This is ALLPOWERS 400 watt portable solar panel. So let's see how much power we can get on this one as it's connected into the R2500. So with the 400 watt panel plugged in, we're getting 327 watts, 24, 23, jumping around a little bit. So it does appear that this will work fine with a smaller format solar panel as well. Now what happens to the R2500 overnight if you leave solar panels connected? Well, we tested one morning as the sun was coming up. The panels were still shaded, so the voltage would be fairly low on these panels. Checking in on the power station, there were no beeps or alarms about low voltage. It just started charging, so no issues on the R2500 having solar panels connected all the time. Now you also have the ability to charge the R2500 in your vehicle or off a standalone 12 volt battery. You're going to see a little bit over 100 watts input, which means it's going to take around 20 hours to completely fill the power station from 0 all the way up to 100% state of charge. Now, if 12 volt charging is a little slow for you, the key to charging faster with the power station is increasing the charging voltage. So you can use a 24 volt battery or even a 48 volt battery to charge much faster. You can also use boost converters that are DC to DC converters that take the power of 12 volts and boost it up to a higher voltage. I have a bunch of videos on my channel going through this type of content, so if you want to charge faster, check out those videos. Now I want to illustrate how easy it is to use a 48 volt server rack battery as a DIY expansion battery. So I'll just turn this on here. Basically, I'm using 10 gauge wire with an inline fuse that's plugged straight into the DC charging port of the R2500. So if we take a closer look at the screen, we are charging at nearly 700 watts. So this is 7 times faster than charging with a 12 volt battery. And all we did is we used a higher voltage, and that's how you get faster charging speeds. So after all those charging demos, it's good to see that this supports pass-through charging. It supports adjustable AC charging. So if you have a small inverter or you have a small gas generator that doesn't support the full fast speed charging, you can turn it down to a lower level and it won't overload the generator. Also, the fact that this supports dual charging is awesome. Some other big brands don't even do that. So the fact that you can plug AC and DC input at the same time, charge near 2000 watts is pretty cool. Now, what about warranty, customer support for ALLPOWERS? Now, they offer a 5-year warranty on this model. I don't have too much experience with ALLPOWERS. You guys will have to let me know what your experience is down in the comments section. But I did email their support group, and they did get back to me within 24 hours about some basic questions about this. So they do have a fast response time, at least. Now, when it comes to size and weight of the R2500, it comes in at 63 pounds, which is similar to other power stations in this size bracket. With the lithium iron phosphate batteries, they are rated at 3,500 charge cycles till 80% of the original capacity. Now, as for the size, it's a little bit bulky. You can look in these vents here and you can see just a little bit of open space, so not quite as compact as other models I've tested. You do have these nice handles that are built in with this rubber grip, so it is at least easy to carry around. It doesn't, hurt your hands or anything. For the price, this has performed pretty decently, so you guys are definitely going to have to consider the ALLPOWERS R2500. Now, the last part of the video that I want to go through is my power station grading system. Now, we've talked about all the data for this, so let's compile that together. We're going to put it into my power station grading system. I'll have that link down in the video description so you guys can check that out and see the other power stations I've tested. But it's on my website. It's easy to get to, so let's check it out. So up on the screen is my updated power station grading system. You'll notice 20 different requirements that the power station has to meet in order to get a full score of 10 points. Each one of these requirements is worth a half point. Let's see how the ALLPOWERS R2500 did. So it got a score of 8 points or a grade of a B-. Now it missed out on 4 different requirements, so let's break down those results. First, the pure sine wave inverter had a voltage of 112 volts, so it was a little bit low versus what I like to see. Number 2, it had noise on the AC inverter and also interference that was picked up by my camera. Number 3, the fan noise was above 55 decibels. And the 4th item was it did not support over 150 watts DC output. So with those things missing, it got 8 points total or the grade of a B-. So still very respectable, especially for the price this comes in at. Now in the final section of the video, I like to go through pros and cons for the power stations that I test. So for the R2500, what are the pros and what are the cons? So talking about the good things first, well, I love that we were able to get the 85% goal on both the AC capacity and DC capacity test results. So you do get the rated capacity out of these power stations versus some of the brands that I've tested. Some don't get that actual percentage. So you do get at least 85% on this, so that's a thumbs up. The next thing that I like is the charge controller. The 150 volts input is excellent. Now this charge controller reacts pretty quickly to the sun, so if you have clouds, power drops. Once the cloud goes away, the power goes back up. I didn't ever notice any issues when charging with solar panels on this power station. Now the next one is the actual price. With a capacity of 2016 watt hours advertised, and the price of $879 with my discount code that I'll include down in the video description. That is 43 cents per watt hour, so a lot of power for really cheap. So if you're looking for your first power station, this would be a great way to get into the door so you can kind of learn of how it performs, because you have some power stations that have 1,000 watt hours priced at that price, so you get double of what you would normally get for that price. Now the final thing is I love that it has a ton of connections. You have a ton of USB ports, you have a decent amount of DC output options. You also have a bunch of outlets on the front, including the RV standard outlet. So lots of ways to connect up your devices. Now, what are the things that I don't really like about the R2500? What are some of the quirks? Well, the first one is that the fans are always on when you turn on the AC inverter. Now, because this has smart app connectivity, I hope that they can push a firmware update up to this so that the fans aren't always on, because whenever you push that enable button on the AC inverter, it has fans running in the background. So hopefully they could fix that. The next thing that I'm not a huge fan of is the inverter efficiency and the lower voltage and the noise. So just kind of the inverter quality itself. 112 volts output, so a little bit lower than what I'd like to see. We also had some noise on the AC inverter, and also the efficiency with the 2.16% standby losses per hour. So you'll just have to plan for that. You'll need to, plan to have extra solar, so during the day you're not losing that power. You have solar coming in, charge it a little bit extra so that you don't lose that to the inverter just running in the background. And the final thing that I don't like is the fact that we can't get 150 watts out of the DC output. So that might not be a big deal for some people, but if I was going to take this, camping with me, I'd love to be able to run a diesel heater off such a affordable unit. I mean, just imagine the amount of runtime that you can get on a diesel heater with this, but the fact that those require 150 watts usually to power up, when you're limited to 128 watts on the max output, you're not going to get that. So hopefully you guys found the pros and cons list helpful. I'd love to get your guys' feedback on this model, particularly about those things. What do you think is excellent about this? What are things that you don't like? Throw a comment down below. Now, a huge thanks to ALLPOWERS for sending out the R2500 for this review video, and also for providing a discount code to you guys, my viewers. So I'll include a link to the product and the discount code down in the video description. Now, if you guys happen to like this video, please smash the thumbs up button on your way out. I'll also recommend a couple other videos that you guys can check out if you're interested in this type of content. So I really appreciate you guys' support for the video and sticking around to the end. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the next one.